Going live now. We are live.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you all for joining our last AWS meetup for 2020. It was a tough year for all of us, right? And this meetup, actually, we have two amazing speakers. Before we go there, my name is Muhannad. I'm a solution architect working with Astro at the moment, and I will be your host for today. Our two amazing speakers, we have Kaushik. Kaushik he just joined actually our user group leaders team, and he's helping us a lot with Salam on building this community. And today he will join us to give us a recap of the reInvent 2020. And I think, Kaushik, last year you were in Vegas, right? Attending there?
Yes, I was.
Yeah,
that was good fun.
Right. So Kaushik actually last year, after he went back from Vegas, he gave a recap for 2019. It was awesome. So this time it will be a bit longer, so he can go a bit into details as well in the summary, and he will share with us his top 5 announcements from AWS. And our second speaker, Purshottam, I hopefully said your name correctly. He's a CTO at Atos, and he will tell us today how you can deploy a fraud detection and operational efficiency solution on AWS using IoT and analytics. Very interesting topic. I'm looking forward for that. And before we get started, guys, please drop your questions for the speakers. They will pick it up after they finish or in the mid of their talk. So ask them as much as you want. And if you are not talking or if you are not asking any question, please help to mute yourself on Google Meet because we are live. And before we end this meetup, we will have a networking session. We had fun last time, so you can stay after the meetup. We will shut down the live on YouTube, and we can just hang out talking about anything you guys want, cloud, music, anything. So I will pass it to you, Kaushik, from here. And
all right.
Looking forward to hear all the excitement in the reInvent.
Thank you, Mo. Let me share my screen and to confirm once you're able to see that. Give me a second. All right. So is my screen visible, guys?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Mo. Hello, everyone. And now that you would know that we are towards that particular month for AWS, which is huge for them, with reInvent happening at Las Vegas, with about 10 different hotels and venues, with 50,000 people or more at that place. This is something which happens every year, and this year would have been the 9th edition. Unfortunately, given the condition, this could not happen in Vegas in person. So, of course, all the networking sessions, all of that is missed out. But on the better side of it, what has happened is we have had a prolonged reInvent over 3 weeks, and we'll be sharing those details in today's session. All right. So some numbers around this with respect to what entailed for reInvent 2020. So there were 5 keynote sessions, and it was spread over 3 weeks. We had more than 500 sessions, in different languages, and some were repeat and so on and so forth. But it was great. So they did a great job. Quality of speakers, quality of sessions. The reInvent team actually sent out the light rings, the recording devices to them, to each of these speakers to maintain that standard across all the sessions and quality sessions from everywhere. As always, there have been great educational sessions on there, and especially for the new releases that happened, there were very good deep dive sessions that were conducted. So I would encourage everyone to register. Like tomorrow is the last day that was there. 18th of December is the last day for this reInvent session, and some of them are still accessible on that. So I would highly recommend, and soon they will be available on YouTube as well. Right. So from what I went through, there were key announcements, which was about 50 plus, and tons and tons and tons of other announcements that happen and releases that happen, to which we can't even keep a count of. And for the number of people who attended these, as of per the first keynote, which was early December, there were more than 500,000 registrants. That's a 10x registration that happened as compared to if what would have happened in person. So that's the benefit of having it online and free for everyone, right? So that's what happened. So as for the reinvents, as I said, there were about most of the key announcement happened around these 5 keynote sessions that are listed here, which started off with Andy Jassy, and prior to that, there was a late night in which there was one announcement which we'll talk about. Then there was the partner keynote for all the partners here. There's some great details in there. If you're interested, do that. I'm not covering announcements from the partner keynote today, because not many partners would be in here. Then we had a specific dedicated ML keynote, machine learning keynote this time around. This was the very first time that happened. And we had the VP of ML, Amazon ML, actually sharing what is being done within AWS and what were the new announcements around it. So hope there are a lot of data engineers and data analytic folks in the session today. I have not been able to appreciate all of those announcements as much as you would, because I'm not an avid user of those services, but I'm sure all of the other data engineers here would appreciate most of the announcements being done in that keynote. Then there was this infrastructure keynote, not many announcements during that, but of course we got to learn on how they are running their infrastructure, right from the cement they use to how they select data center locations, and so on and so forth, and even some details on how they introduce the new Mac device in there in the racks. So that was some good insights in that session. And finally, we had a day before yesterday for us, and yesterday as per the US time zone, which is we had the Werner Vogel's keynote, and that was the very last one, and through which there were some wonderful announcements that came through as well, not during the sessions, but post that session that happened, right? So I've broken down my session into various components like compute, storage, and so on and so forth. And I have some topics that I've kept towards the end, which I'll talk about, right? So as part of the compute, the very first thing that set a buzz everywhere for everyone was the introduction of macOS on AWS. So now you can start and have a EC2 server powered by macOS, and you could actually run an Apple machine on the cloud, right? And they have changed a lot of terms and conditions in the backend. Apple has done that recently, and now this makes sense why they did it, because now it is available as a cloud service. There are a few, I would say, a catch, because it is there out, very transparent in the blogs and everywhere. But those who are used to on-demand and used to the way AWS works, there are a few things here which are a default and we should be taking care of. The Mac OS instance comes in with a minimum tenancy of 1 day. So that's a minimum tenancy that you can take in, because it comes with a dedicated host tenancy, to say, right? So it's not a shared model. So you have a dedicated host. Whenever you ask for a server, a Mac Mini is actually provisioned for you, and then that gets allocated to you, and then you can access it via the console. So if you plan to use it, so the customer benefits here are, if you have a team working to build iOS applications for your iPads, watch, and mobiles, or even for macOS, now you could actually do it on the cloud at scale and not have to purchase it, and so on and so forth. So there are a few price debates that are happening, but that's for everyone to think about whether it's a good fit for you or not, right? And there was a small line mentioning in the blog that the new M1 Apple M1 chips will also be available on AWS by mid 2021. So that's what they have written. So looks like when Apple moved on from their Intel-based system to M1, they just wanted to get rid of all of them, and they sent it out to AWS. So that's a joke and the background that happens, or the chat that happens around the community, right? But yeah, so that's about that. next thing that I would like to talk about are a few new instance types that have been launched. So the very first one that I would like to talk about is D3 and D3EN. So this one is very specific to give you better or higher disk throughput as compared to the D2 instance. So people from the benchmarking that has happened, D3 instances might provide you about 2.5x higher networking speed, right? And 45% higher disk throughput as compared to a D2 instance. So those who want a high throughput onto your storage, this is one thing to look at. And the D3EN could also give you as much as 100% higher disk throughput as compared to D2 instance. So that's on that. The next one that we have is G480, which is an AMD powered graphic intensive server, right? So that's something that has been introduced. In line with the M5 series that was there, there was a new instance that was launched called the M5ZN, which is Intel powered, right? And this gives you a high speed and low latency network, right? So this is what its focus is on to provide you here. Then there was a launch of R5B, which was again focusing on EBS performance here, to give you a significantly higher EBS performance. So these were based on the performance with respect to network and so on and so forth. But the next one is very specific to running and hosting ML-based workload on EC2, right? So Habana, the Habana Labs is basically an Intel company, and they have something called the Gaudi accelerators, which is a competitor to the NVIDIA's services that they have. So the EC2, which is powered by the Gaudi accelerators, is basically specifically designed for training deep learning models, so a very ML specific. And finally, they launched a new chip. Last year, if you remember, they launched something called Inferentia, and this year they have launched Trinium. So basically, this chip is basically for, again, ML specific and dedicated to training machine learning models, similar to Howdy, but this will be coming before the Gabbana, that series. And this is to be launched this year. So now the chips are launched, but the instances are not available yet. So the instances will be available around mid next year. And this will be available both in, the flavors of this will be available both in EC2 and in Amazon SageMaker. So both of them will have this, right? And finally, not a new instance type, but a similar flavor. Here, they announced a new flavor of Outpost. For those who are not aware of what Outpost is AWS's service to host the infrastructure in your data center, but is completely managed by AWS, and it's connected to your most closest region. So if in Kuala Lumpur, they would ship the device, a complete rack in your data center, you provide the power, the networking, and all of that, and it's still there, so giving you low latency approach for enterprises, but connected to the cloud. So everything is managed by AWS team. However, I think they've had challenges where the rack comes in one size. So there would be instances, I'm assuming, that data centers would not have had the required space to support such a huge one. And that's where they've come up with smaller versions of 1 unit to 2 units, where you can launch it and they would ship it to you, and then you host it in your own racks, right? So that's what one of the services is about. And this again will be available by mid 21. All right. So the next part that we'll talk about is around the topic of containers and serverless. So more specifically to containers now. So one interesting and that caught a lot of attention for everyone was the Elastic Container Registry, which was earlier available, but within AWS only. Now they announced something which is a public one. So this is available for everyone with or without an AWS account for you, right? And it's available to store store and share container software, and globally that can be done. And then they also provided like a public marketplace where you can put in everything, and they call it the ECR public gallery, right? So that's what is there. There, why was this required, right? Currently, there is an ECR private repository. There's marketplace for containers for partners, but why was this required? So that actually, for some eye, this announcement was done after another announcement that was there, which I'll talk about next. And this justifies why it was there. So coming to this slide, does this ring a bell to anyone? Do you guys recognize what this is?
Anthos. Is it Anthos?
That's right. That is Anthos. So basically, if you remember, Google announced something called Google Anthos to run their flavor of Kubernetes anywhere. They were explicit that you can run it on AWS. They wanted a share of projects running on AWS to run on Google as well. So they did it. So did Azure and a lot of others. AWS did not go that route until now because they did not have to, because they've been the leaders in this and they didn't see a need to do it. But this year, in a very subtle way, AWS announced something called ECS Anywhere and EKS Anywhere. So I termed it as EXS Anywhere. But yeah, the two services that they launched was ECS Anywhere and EKS Anywhere, saying that you can run the AWS flavor of Kubernetes and their distro anywhere on your premise or anywhere on any other account, and so on and so forth, which also means you can run it on Google's GCP, or you can run it on Azure or any other provider, right? So this is AWS's take to go hybrid cloud so that it supports across. So anyone who anywhere who wants to move even and support a hybrid cloud approach, this is what they have done in a very, very subtle way. And this is why it's a rare event that AWS doesn't do that very frequently, right? And because this also encourages that you could run your ecosystem outside of AWS, but still under their control. This is supported and powered by EKS distro, which also supports the EKS on AWS. So now that EKS Anywhere is available, my personal thought, I'm not sure how many people would continue to use ECS Anywhere. They have their own pros and cons, but I think there'll be a lot of uptake for EKS as such. And because with the support of EKS Anywhere, they would be able to go to multiple host locations on premise or other things. The next one, which was launched, so Amazon MQ itself has been there since 2017, supporting ActiveMQ, but now they launched support for RabbitMQ as well. So this is a complete managed service for hosting RabbitMQ, especially those who are running RabbitMQ on premise. You would understand the pain to manage the cluster around it, scalability and high availability. All of that is now done. So this is your RDS version of database to manage and complete RabbitMQ cluster. All right. So the next one that we'll talk about is AI and ML. Very specific, and the floodgates were opened up in this one, where they went gung-ho with the announcements that they did. But to my personal opinion here is that this has not been a lot of new services, but it has been addition, and they plug the gaps that were there in the existing ecosystem of SageMaker. So they announced it as individual services, but this is what I've done. I put it across as under SageMaker, what are the things that were made available. So first thing that they announced was SageMaker pipelines. As the theme was about automation throughout the reinvent, all the services, everything has been around automation, reducing the human intervention in all the aspects. So managed services, that has been the theme, and that has been brought to the AI ML space as well. So in SageMaker, they announced SageMaker pipelines, which is a purpose-built CI/CD service for machine learning, right from your deployment, training, and output, you can develop that and use this pipeline CI/CD framework to deploy your ML workload. The next service that was launched is Data Wrangler, which is called SageMaker Data Wrangler, that aggregates and prepares data. That is again a managed service by them. They followed it up with something called the Feature Store, which allows you to list out all the features built and to be shared across the team, right? So if you want to build it and you want to make it available, that's a feature store, and consider it, I would call it a Git repository for the ML features that are being built, right? Next is Edge Manager. So this is something very cool, according to me. So basically, Edge Manager is like, it's a complete set of tools for model management across the fleets on the edge devices. So basically very much defining and again tying up the IoT space where all of the models are deployed into the fleet, and you can manage the entire fleet and monitor it and secure it using the Edge Manager. So this is like the system manager from that we have. This is for the IoT space, I would say, right? Then we have the next one is the debugger, which is more specific to debugging your profiles and the training jobs that you've done in ML. So those who are into data, you would actually appreciate what this does and how it improves this. I'm not able to appreciate it as much as you do. The last one that I would like to talk about is basically Clarify. Clarify is to help you with the bias, to detect bias. So you have a data model, and based on the data model, you might see that that data set might have a certain bias to a certain topic modeling and so on and so forth. So using machine learning, for machine learning, they built a service called Clarify, which will help customers detect the bias in the models that are there, right? So that's on that. The next thing that I would like to talk about is DevOps Guru. So last year, if you would remember, there was an announcement called Cloud Guru. Oh, sorry, Code Guru, right? That will help you to understand where you have memory leaks in your code, where you have how can your SQL queries be improvised, and so on and so forth. So that was Code Guru, but there were lesser, languages that were supported. Recently in Code Guru as well, they announced support for Python and a few more, which we'll talk about. And supporting that based on the data that they've had, they felt that they can help customers to detect the anomalies that could happen in the DevOps cycle as well. So that's where they introduced something called the DevOps Guru, right? And as part of the Code Guru, as I said, they announced something called a security update, which will help you scan and implement security best practices as part of it. So that's something that I wanted to call out. And finally, as part of Monitron, which is industry-based, analytics device. So this will take you to the industry, analyze it. So they have a set of 5. I wanted to put that image over here, but I forgot on that. So they have a central router, and they have like 4 to 5 devices that can send signal. They connect using Bluetooth, and the main device is connected using Wi-Fi. And any abnormalities in the machinery can be taken over and sent for analysis. So that's on the industry side. So that's one thing that they have announced from the actual device announcement. There were a couple of them as well, which I missed to point out, which was around Panorama, which is again converting your camera into something which can help provide machine learning modeling on the video itself, right? So at the edge, you connect them, and then you get video analysis from your camera. So it makes any camera into a smart camera, if I have to say, right? So that's few points on that. The next component that we will be talking about is analytics. So we spoke about machine learning and AI, but now analytics on the whole, there were some crazy announcements as well. The first being to something called Data Brew, right? So this allows you to, it gives you a GUI where it's a visual data preparation tool, and it will help the customers or the users to clean and normalize data without writing any code. So again, that's another thing that many people will appreciate, where all you need is access to the console, and then you can clean and normalize your data, which can be tiresome and cumbersome, right? So that's one new release that happened. The next one is called Elastic Views. So AWS Glue Elastic Views is the name of the service, and this allows you to create and materialize views across many databases. So this is it is not a take on QuickSight, but a similar one. But this allows you to support multiple sources like DynamoDB, Redshift, S3, Elasticsearch, and many more services are being added in. So these is something that is coming through, and they're adding that in. Uh, and finally, the other thing that they have here is with respect to QuickSight Q. So there is a service called QuickSight as of today, where you can build dashboards using this. So something similar to Tableau that you would have somewhere else, right? So you have Tableau or ClickSense or ClickView. You use this, and this is as part of the AWS. You create users for viewing and creating dashboards, and it connects back to your data warehouse in AWS or anywhere else, and provides you dashboard. But there was a problem statement. With QuickSight, you had to write the exact query into the search, and then get the views if you want to search something. Think of the experience of searching something in Kibana, right? So you need to have some understanding of how to write the syntax. So what they did was, now they have enabled something called QuickSight Q, which is an NLP-based search, and it understands the business logic behind it, and then inferences and gets all the data based on a human language. You write human language. I would like to know output of business in this hour to this hour, and it will get the data based on that. It's basically a language processing algorithm there, using ML, get the data and showcase. So that's something that will help boost the QuickSight business, because that's something which has not been a very big hit amongst the data analytics team because of its limitation. But these features will help with the adoption for it.
So is
Right?
it like the project manager can now use QuickSight?
That's right. That's exactly what they have tried to
All
resolve.
right.
So
Because in Astra, we had like this chatbot. I think you work on that project, right? So when we want to get something from QuickSight, we get the dashboard that's called sometime, right? So in this case, then we can just give them access, right? And they can write.
they can search for it, and then real-time data is available. So this is basically making it easy to give access to the dashboard to business users who don't understand tech language.
Love it.
Right?
Nice.
Right. So that's a new feature that they did. And now moving to Redshift, there's been a couple of other points as well, but one thing that I think caught my eye was data sharing and moving clusters across AZ. So this has been a pain point for our implementations that we have done previously. So now you can share data across the clusters, even cross-region, I believe, with using a simple API call. So that's something that is available now. So Redshift data sharing, that's something to look for. And also now you can move clusters across AZs with just one query, and then it will help you to not replicate it, but actually move it, replicate, and then shut down this. So that is something which is available. A lot of use cases that can be addressed using this. Right? All right. So that's about analytics. Now coming to storage, two great announcements, at least worth the mention, is GP3 EBS volumes. Why is this important? Until now, if you needed IOPS, higher IOPS, you had to increase your volume size, right? Because there was a correlation between it. So if you want higher performance, increase the capacity. Now this with this seventh variation of EDS volume, now you can get independent performance irrespective of what the capacity that you do. So basically, it allows you to provision performance apart from capacity, and it gives you a predictable 3000 IOPS baseline performance. It comes at a cost, but for those who want it, they don't want to spend on the costing, this will give you a good cost optimization capability. And with a click, there's a 5-step method for you to move from the current version GP2 to GP3, so that you can do, right? And the next one for S3, I think many will appreciate this, is now S3 will provide strong read after write consistency. For years, this has been there as eventual read after write consistency, but this is something which has been announced and will be available by default. And you don't have to go through your application to manage this use case where there'll be eventual read after write consistency. So that's one, and it will be available for no extra cost. So then they just improve the performance without increasing the cost, right? So I hope that interests a lot of folks, and especially those who are preparing for your certifications. This is one question that always comes in, and hopefully with this introduction 6 months down the line, that will be updated in the exam as well. But yeah, keep in mind, so this is something to look for. All right. In the security aspect, there were two things that I would like to talk about. One is an audit manager. So this is yet another product killer, as I call it, because this basically kills products like Gremlin and other things, which, sorry, not Gremlin, the other Gremlin is something else. So the audit manager, there are many ones who give you continuous auditing for PCI compliance, various PCI, DCC, iOS, and ISO, and all of those. So now this audit manager is out of the box, provided by AWS, and they also have a freaking free tier to support your requirements, right? And as of today, these are the 3 compliance that are available: CIS benchmark, AWS Foundation benchmark, GDPR, and PCI DSS. But this is available out of the box for you, right? Another one that was announced is Chaos Engineering as a Service. For those who, this is something new. There was an open source flavor of this, which was put into as available to everyone by Netflix, and they called it Chaos Monkey. I think this name will resonate with many. So what one of Google's announced was they are announcing a new service which will be available, I think, mid next year, and it will be called Fault Injection Simulator. So this is basically to test your reliability of your ecosystem. You purposefully induce failure to see how the ecosystem responds and recuperates from that. So that's something that has been that will be available as a service. So earlier we had those who were doing the Chaos Monkey implementation, they had to manage the infrastructure and the thing behind it. But now there is an easy console that will be made available. So basically here, if you see, is you create a experiment template, start the experiment with the fault injection, and then sorry about that, fault injection, and then use the monitoring components like EventBridge and CloudWatch, and stop the experiment and see results. So everything on the console. So that's something to look for as well. So that's on security. The next one that we have is on management and governance. All right. So 2 things that I would like to share is now the well-architected tool that was available on the console also has APIs. So now there could be many other products that will come in to integrate with the well-architected tool APIs. This was launched today morning, where it will actually allow you to add the components, and give you a real-time analytics as well. So there are a lot of potential in this, and this is something to look forward for, especially those who are partners who work on compliance domain. This is something where you can leverage and get what the customer wants. Another one that was introduced is cost and usage report, or CUR as we call it, CUR. That is now available in the linked accounts as well. So now they have removed the master and the linked terminology in AWS. Now they will be using the member word. So all the child accounts will be called as the member accounts. So that's where here you see. So the member accounts will now have visibility at that level as well. So that's very interesting for those folks who manage the operations. This is a huge relief because you don't have to break down right from the master account to see what is the breakdown for your individual accounts. So I think that's one good introduction. Yeah, any questions? Okay. All right. So the next one, again, launched today morning, I guess, is something around Amazon Location Service. So this is a take on the Google Map dominance. They have been predominantly there, but now with this, there will be an AWS service that you could use internally in the AWS environment and use APIs. And all of this is powered by the global trusted providers of Esri and here. So these are the folks. It is under preview now, limited preview as they call it. But when it goes GA, which is generally available, they will provide routing capabilities as well. So now that's a take on Google Maps or even Azure Map APIs that are out there, or other open source map APIs. So AWS will now have its own location service available. Right. All right. So the next session, these points is towards the end of it that I would like to call out. So these are worth a mention that has been announced either from Vanavargal's keynote until today afternoon. So these are the few things that have come out, and I would like to share some details on this. So the managed services for Grafana is basically, it'll give you a complete managed and secure data visualization service that you can do. And until now, you had to manage the implementation or use Grafana service. Now this is available here as part of AWS. The next one is managed services for Prometheus, so which is basically monitoring service to make it easy for monitoring your containers and applications at scale, containerized application at scale. So that's one thing that was announced by Vanavargal. These two were his most lauded announcements that happened. Another one that happened was AWS Cloud Shell. So a lot of infra folks and a lot of developers would love this. So this has been there with other cloud providers for some time, and now AWS has announced this. So on the go for you to manage as a web-based CLI, and you could actually do it. So and it comes pre-installed with most of the kits, right? It comes in with EKS kits and others in there. So it's already there. PIP and all of that is pre-installed. And surprisingly, they give you a storage of 1 GB per user across the account. So it is not, so this is huge because every user can actually push data over there and store it and use it, right, on that Cloud Shell console. And it is available, and that data will be available across sessions as well. Even if you terminate a session, come back, you'll have that data. So technically, it is like giving your Cloud Shell environment 1 GB of perpetual storage. And it is not across users, it is per user in every account. So that is huge. So that's something to look for. And unfortunately, it's not available in SG yet, in Singapore yet, but other regions are available. So you should be able to look at that, right? So yeah, that's that. Then, as I said, this time around, they did not announce any deep gadgets. Earlier, at least in the last two reinvents, they announced the Deep Racer and the Deep Composer and all of that. This time there was nothing deep. So they announced something called the IoT EduKit. So that's on the infrastructure side, apart from the Monitron and other aspects. This is now available on Amazon. I think in Singapore it's available for about $42, and it gives you an access to sensors, mic, small cameras. So it's a complete IoT kit that you can purchase and work around if you want to do some hands-on on IoT. This is a good thing to start off with. So AWS have got their own kit in the market. Right. Next, as part of the system manager, they announced 2 points, which is change manager and fleet manager. Is basically to manage change management and putting in points where you want to get the required approval and so on and so forth. So that's one thing that they did. So people have done automation using Jira and other aspects for getting approval. So now this allows you to automate that, sending out emails, click of a button, getting an approval, and so on and so forth. So the change management now can be done using System Manager, Change Manager, right? Confusing name, so that's why I separated the part of AWS System Manager, but it's called AWS System Manager, Change Manager. Yeah. The next one that they call is Fleet Manager, is for a complete fleet management. So that's what they have as part of System Manager to manage it. So yes, so that's one. And the last one is a very minor release, but I think a lot of you would enjoy that, is unified search. When you go to AWS console, and if you want to search, let's say users, you can just say users and it will open IAM and go to the users console. So rather than you searching IAM and then going to users, now you can actually search across and even further deep. So that's what I've read about. That's something which is available, and you should be able to see that in the console as of today. All right. All right. So that's on the major releases, but I have about 3 to 4 top picks that I have, and I'll share why. I think I have a couple, about 10 more minutes more, just a quick time check. Do I have about 10 more minutes? I would like to pace it accordingly.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So I have about 4 of them. So for me, the top pick of the releases that happened in this reinvent, this tops the list for me, and for a particular reason, right? So Babelfish, what they did is that is a Postgres, they announced something called Babelfish for Postgres SQL Aurora, and Aurora Postgres SQL, and they also announced an open source project around the same lines as well. But what does this do? Basically, let me give you a case study and see what is the problem statement and take that forward, right? So the case study here that we're going to talk about is basically a requirement where you want to move from using a SQL Server database to Postgres, right? So what you would do, so the first step that you have to do is bring the schema and convert the schema from SQL to Aurora. You can do that. There is tool which is your AWS schema conversion tool. You have this. After that, you have to migrate the data from your SQL to Aurora. Perfect. You can do that using database migration service. But however, until now, there's always been a resistance from the customers or who are using it, because you have to rewrite the application as well. Because here the application is actually reading the T-SQL endpoint or the protocol, and if you convert into a Postgres, you are going to use a PLSQL protocol, and you have to adapt the application to actually do that, right? And you have to rewrite the app code and switch the drivers and so on and so forth. So what they did was, what if your application can talk any of the languages? Either your application can talk T-SQL, or your application can talk PL SQL, And in the backend, it actually uses Aurora database. So that was what Babelfish does. It allows that layer to convert SQL, T-SQL protocols to PL/SQL without you requiring to change the application in one go, right? So here, the way that customers would adopt it is they would do the migration of database. Application starts using PostgreSQL using Babelfish because the conversion is happening there. Newer applications that are there, the further modifications that in the application you read directly to the PostgreSQL endpoint. So which would mean that the old application will talk T-SQL. The new changes that you do will talk PL/SQL, and then in the backend it's just one database, which is Aurora Postgres. And gradually you have the time, you buy yourself time to rewrite the code from SQL to things. So you do away with your legacy gradually. So that's a great feature, and that's why that stands out for me. So that's on Babelfish. They also, what they did was they made the Babelfish for Postgres open source, so which will be available on Git around March next year, and you would be able to contribute to it as well. So as of today, they support store procedures and other majorly used functionality of SQL, and they support it with PL/SQL as well. So they gave us good examples where there is the money type, where in P-SQL it goes up to 4 decimal points, whereas in PL/SQL it goes only to 2 decimal points. So that causes a concern, and that is where the Babelfish manages that to manage the consistency. And now assume that you are using a particular feature of SQL which is not supported by Babelfish. You can contribute to that, and then it will be available for Aurora PostgreSQL as well once it is standardized and it is pulled into that. So that's on that. The next one that stands out to me is AWS Proton. AWS Proton is basically a fully managed deployment service specifically for containers and serverless. But okay, what is it basically? So this one that we speak about is basically a complete service where you have your infrastructure team that you would see, right? Right here, you have the infrastructure team which defines the stack and publishes a stack. They say, okay, for microservices, you use Fargate, you use EKS, or you use Lambda. So they create that, they publish it. Now, the developers have to figure out how do they use it, right? As of today, what you would do is you would write a CloudFormation template and then put it. But then there is an integration required to code pipeline where your developer will be pushing the data, right? So all of that is something which is there, and then deploy it. So that is there. And then monitoring again has come back to the infrastructure team. So this is a process. But with Proton, they make it a seamless offering. What my understanding is, this is basically in the backend the same services like CloudFormation, Core Pipeline, and CloudWatch, and they have put a very neat wrapper around it called it AWS Proton, and making it seamless for the developers and infrastructure guys, where they give more control to infrastructure team for them to ensure that they can use only this kind of stack. For the developers, they're not still dependent on infrastructure guys, because the deployment, all of that is integrated. That integration layer is done by the AWS Proton. You don't as a developer, you don't have to go through the CI/CD scope of it. And then finally, monitoring and everything from an operations perspective is also made available as part of that. So in case any deployment goes bad or any issues with that, that's also available in the container and in the serverless concept. So this is huge. And especially for big enterprises or even medium to medium scale teams, this is a huge way to orchestrate the entire process. So this is a new service, but I think in the backend, it's well integrated services in the backend that probably you would have custom designed the pipeline as of today, but now they made it available as a service, right? So that's one thing. right? Yeah, and the next one that stands out for me is Lambda Billing. Now, if you would notice, you will be billed 1 per millisecond, right? So earlier we were used to per hour billing in EC2, then came per second billing. Even if you're running an application now, you would be running it for 10 milliseconds. Any function you run on Lambda, you would be using it only for a few milliseconds, but still you pay up for the entire second. So now with this millisecond, you can get huge cost benefits, especially with the new introduction of the large Lambda function with 10 gigabyte support and all of that. You increase the capacity and finish your function, finish your function runtime in less than 2 milliseconds, and be charged only for 2 milliseconds. And that would give you better performance and better cost optimization. So since this has been introduced, there's been a lot of papers and blogs out there to how to cost optimize and performance optimize your infrastructure using these two functionality, which is great. So that's one. And now Lambda also supports containers as well. So if you have containers, you can also run that now on Lambda. So that's the second one regarding that. And the last and the final one that I have, and which I would like to call out and which stands out for me, is Aurora Serverless V2. All right. So what is the Aurora Serverless? Just a moment. So what is the Aurora Serverless, right? So Aurora Serverless basically was available to you where you don't have to manage the capacity of the database, but it had its own limitation, right? You could not run it. It did not have global data sets. It did not have, multi-AZ deployments. It did not have read replica and so on and so forth. And let's say in this use case, right? This is where a step back where it is not serverless. You have to manage your capacity. You have to either, if you have a spiky workload or infrequent. So let's say if you provision for peak, it's going to be expensive, right? If you provision less than peak, end user will be impacted. And if you want to scale up and down automatically at your end, then it is hard, right? Because it requires consistent member required to monitor it and so on and so forth. So these are there. So this is where it's not serverless. Then they introduced serverless, but it had its own issues. So even now to our customers, we always said, don't use serverless for production workload, because the scaling or the replication was, it took time. It was not production ready. But now with the recent launch of Serverless V2, which is still in preview, all of the pain points that are there has been addressed. So earlier in let's call it Serverless V1, right? So in V1, what happened was, in case there was an increase in workload, your compute capacity would be doubled. If you were on 16, you would go to 32, right? So it was 8, 16, and so on and so forth. So even the gradual downgrade of the system was also similar. And the increase was not spontaneous, right? So that was one. The other problem with V1 was global data sets were not available, multi-AZ deployments were not available, read replicas were not available. Even for the support for Postgres was very recent with AWS Aurora Serverless, all of those concerns. But now with Serverless V2, this will have fine grain increments. So if you increase by bit, the smallest AC Aurora compute unit, Aurora unit that you would increase is 0.5. 0.5 is the minimum unit that you will increase by. So if there is a slight peak, it will increase immediately by minimum of 0.5 and more, right? So that gives you to scale fine grain increments, which gives you great cost optimization, and it is immediate. In a fraction of a second, you have that in place, right? So that's one. And in the demo that we saw, what happened was when the peak reduces, what happens is there is a step reduction of the compute. So though the increase is like immediate, spontaneous, the downgrade of the compute capacity is basically in a step way. So they go one by one, and that's how it is done. So yeah, so these were the 4 top picks for me that I wanted to share, and I think that would be it. So yes, so for those who are joining in for the first time, this is Kaushik, and I'm part of Blazeclan Technologies, premier cloud consult APN partner. I'm also a well-architected reviewer and a community builder and APN ambassador. So thank you for joining in, and open to questions or anything that you would like to share that I missed out on.
Thank you so much, Kaushik. Really enjoyed, because I didn't have time to follow on all the announcements lately. But I really like the Aurora serverless, man, version 2. It sounds like really interesting, right?
Right. It is interesting, very incredible.
So my question is, how did you find the virtual reInvent? Did you really enjoy it as like attending in Vegas, or you find like less excitement? Virtual.
So of course, you miss the networking here, in-person networking. So be it for business or for your personal requirements, in-person networking is always helpful. Here, last time we could not attend a lot of educational sessions there. We caught up only after we got back on YouTube and so on and so forth, but then you don't get to go through all of them. This time around, it was easier. You could plan everything. You don't have to run from one hotel space to the other, waiting for the bus and so on and so forth. So this one was easier in that way. And it was spread out across 3 weeks. So that was tiring, but it was good.
And it was free, of course, right? We didn't pay anything for it.
It was free, yeah, as compared to the 1800 pass that would be there.
Yeah, correct. And is there any like service or like any feature you were waiting for it but didn't happen yet?
In particular, I think for me, one is as a well-architected practitioner, I think the well-architected tool is something that is I did not expect that, so that's something which is good. And of course, the serverless. So the Aurora serverless is something where we have had issues where customers want to use it because of the benefit that it gets in. But yeah, that was a good one.
Right. Guys, please, if you have any question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Kaushik any question you want.
Yep.
I think that's it, Kaushik. Thank you, man. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Okay, let me just share my screen quickly. You guys can see my screen, right? Let me.
Yeah, I think you'll just need to go into the product presentation mode. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So before we jump to our second speaker, we have actually one hiring announcement today. We have it from a new startup actually based in Kuala Lumpur called ESPL. They are in the esport industry. Very interesting if you are into Dota or CSGO or you like gaming. Sounds like really interesting to me. So they are looking basically for AWS system admin. And if you are interested in this role, you can just send your CV to this email. And I will share this email on our user group on Facebook. So if you are not there, you can join us as well there. And if you are hiring for your team, or you are building a new team and you want some talents from like familiar with AWS, you can scan this QR code, fill up the form, and we will do the announcement next meetup. And if you are building something cool or you want to share anything about AWS aside the project you are building, a freelance or something cool at your company, any level, guys, from beginner to advanced, we love to hear from you. So you can as well scan this QR code, fill up the form, and we will send you an email to get your details. And again, I will share all these things again on our Facebook group. So if you missed it here, you can just check it on our user group there. So let's welcome our second speaker. I think this is the first time we have Purshottam, hopefully saying your name correctly. Again, he's a CTO in Atos, and he will share today how you can build a fraud detection using AWS. I'm really interested in this topic because when I was working in Fave, sometimes we have some fraud, and we were trying to automate this processing using AWS as well. So I'm really looking forward to hear from you, and I will pass it to you from here. So you can just share your camera, and awesome, I can see you now. And you can share your screen and unmute your mic as well.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you very well.
Okay, all right. Do you mind giving me an access to share my screen, please?
Yeah, let me just stop, and now you can just present now.
All right. Okay. So just let me know if you're able to see my screen.
Yeah, we still can see.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, now I can see your screen.
Yes. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. So thank you, Juan, and welcome everyone. So it's a pleasure to speak in this AWS meetup, and Kaushik, a very insightful session. In fact, even I was attending some of the reInvent session, and I could kind of synchronize with what you mentioned. Okay. So my name is, so to introduce myself, my name is Purshottam. I'm based out of Kuala Lumpur, and I work for a company called Atos. It's a French company. I work as a CTO for APAC region, and my day job is to do a lot of innovations for our customers around the digital technologies. And one of the key thing which I do is leverage IoT. Now IoT in terms of end-to-end, and then help customers in terms of how they can make use of the IoT data, which would help them either in improving their operational efficiency or improving the customer experience. Okay, so I would also admit that I'm new to this group here. So when I was looking at Facebook, and when I arrived in Kuala Lumpur, so I was before I was in Europe, then I spent a lot of some time in India, then I came to KL here. So for me here in KL, it's almost like 10 to 11 months now here. I'm really enjoying it. And that is where I came up to this, I saw this group and I said, maybe it's a good idea that I could share some of my experiences using AWS, and maybe if I could be of any help to anyone, I'm more than happy to do that. Okay. So for the topic for today, what I plan to do is I'm going to talk about how we had leveraged IoT. So started the journey with using IoT implementation, and then after running the IoT operations for a couple of months or to an year, we kind of educated the customer in terms of that we've got a good insights of the operations, and maybe it could be a good idea that we become more predictive in our operations. Okay, so predictive in terms of improving the customer experience, or in this case, it was fraud. So how could we basically use the cloud technology or the web scale architecture, for instance, which the cloud providers provide, and really help in eventually reducing the frauds. And when you reduce the fraud, customer is happy for it, and they come and use your service. Okay, so that's where we use the analytics power. Okay, and then eventually I would say it's not a one-off journey, but I would say this is a continuum. Okay, and eventually what we plan to do is going forward, as we would have heard today from AWS, they are doing a lot of stuff around IoT as well. In terms of, for instance, they open source their Edge framework, so it's available on GitHub. They have announced a lot of IoT services. So the idea is eventually take a couple of those and move further. Okay, so what I plan to do from now to the next 20-25 minutes is I'll be talking in terms of what the customer challenges was, what constraints we had in terms from a technology perspective, and how we use AWS to handle those. Okay, And at the same time, I would also like to share with you what works, what doesn't in AWS as well. So because it's not always the way it looks as is, and some of the things, best practices, which we have seen, which we have taken forward. Okay, and eventually, how do we want to move further? Okay. So let me tell you who the customer was. Now, if you want to see on the right-hand side, the customer was oil marketing company. They have this lot of this petrol stations. I'm sure everyone will be familiar with. Everyone goes to fuel their cars. Okay. Now, what this customer is, they has more than 25,000 petrol stations, and these petrol stations are eventually managed by the various dealers, but the IT equipment at each of those petrol stations is provided by this company. Okay, so this vendors manages on their behalf of the customer. Okay, and what at each of these petrol stations, now there are more than 50 plus sensors. So these sensors are dispensers, and then there are tanks beneath this retail stations. There are RFID readers, then retail stores and stuff like that. So eventually, for this customer, the way we started this journey was we automated these petrol stations. Now, how did we automate the petrol stations? By installing an edge gateway and integrating all these IoT sensors. And what we were doing was we were providing a very confined view to this dealer in terms of which dispenser, how much fuel was dispensed, and at the same time, this information was sent to a centralized data warehouse, which was an Informatica-based data warehouse. Okay, and using the IoT sensors, we were able to kind of help this dealer in terms of managing the stocks and stuff like that. Okay, so this operations has been running for a while. We were able to replicate this IoT solutions, the edge gateway, the sensors, and everything for more than 25,000 petrol stations now. Okay, now taking this forward, now why would customer wanted to do this? One was to manage the supply chain so that there are no stockouts. And at the same time, since this is dealer managed, the vendor managed, the customer didn't had any kind of an access to in terms of what's happening at the petrol station. Okay, so that is where we kind of did a couple of innovation workshops, and we told them that maybe now you have gathered so much of data. What we can do is we can help you to, as I said, operational excellence, do fraud detection. So eventually, what we observed using this IoT automation was a couple of places. There was access delivery of the fuel. Okay, now this delivery of the fuel could be because of the wrong calibration of the dispensers. Okay, so for instance, if I say I want to 10 liters of fuel, sometimes you get 11 liters, for instance, or sometimes couple of places it could be that dealer might be doing some fraud, so he would be manipulating this dispenser. So though on the reading shows 10 liters, you might get 9 liters. So again, that is where the fraud happens. Okay, the second issue which we wanted to solve was this IoT actually resulted into a lot of alarms, and these alarms were kind of repetitive. Okay, and eventually from a dealer perspective, he had a lot of alarms, and he was getting kind of lost in terms of which one are the critical ones, which one should be handled. Okay, so eventually what we wanted to do is we wanted to make the IoT operations more predictive. So that was just the second one, so that we remove this repetition of the alarms. Okay, third thing was a couple of vendors were doing a fraud. They were selling a product at a wrong retail price. Okay, so the idea was eventually to look at getting this real-time data, and whenever the price change of the fuel, and it's like a stock exchange. For example, every day the price of fuel changes. So ensuring that the same price is reflected in all the petrol stations, so that no one at the local level is able to override. So that was the third pain point which the customer wanted to handle. The other point was any IoT device downtime. What either make that petrol station out of service, or in the IoT functionality which we had created, we were able to override it. So for example, if IoT edge gateway is down, we had provided a switch which would mean that the petrol stations go to the manual mode. So when it's in manual mode, that is where there are chances of having a lot of frauds. And so again, we have to ensure that the IoT is up and running all the time. Okay, and then last not the least is if I am visiting one petrol station, but eventually if certain number of days if I go to another petrol station, there was no centralized database. So in case if I wanted to do an offer, that was not possible. For instance, the second one issue which I had was, in case if there's a long weekend, then there are chances that there could be stockouts, or could be that probably the kind of fuel which the customer is looking for is not available at that petrol station. So eventually, these were the couple of problem statements which we received from the customer, or I would say which we observed over a period of time during the IoT implementation. Okay. So the way we kind of splitted this into 4 quadrants. So first one was quantity and quality, and that is where we use a lot of we moved from rule-based approach to a machine learning-based approach, where because we had collected so much amount of data, and we were able to identify a pattern in terms of what was my stock versus what was my sale, for instance. And in case if we find any anomalies or abnormalities, we raise a quality-related issue. So that was the first quadrant. The second is the health of automation. So eventually, what we did is we were getting this data from this IoT devices in terms of how the dispenser is doing, or how's the different stock level at the tank gauges. So we were able to again identify anomalies in terms of availability, and we were able to say, well, how is the health of the automation. So in case if the petrol pump goes onto the manual mode, we are able to identify why it did go. Okay, so that was second. Third one is sales analytics. So as I said, it's more of getting or capturing a lot of customer insights for running a lot of loyalty. So taking data from different POS systems, payment terminals, and stuff like that, and eventually kind of analyze, mash up, and provide this kind of data. And last not the least is on devices. So eventually, as I said, this dispensers, this is eventually a mechanical component, right? Now calibration is needed at regular interval. Now the way the calibration used to work was based on calendars day. So after every 3 months, this guy would go there and he would calibrate it. But eventually with the IoT implementation, we were able to move from a calendar-based schedule approach to more of a predictive-based approach. Okay, so this is how we kind of solution this into 4 quadrants, and for each of those quadrants, we identified use cases. So again, we use this mechanism which is called design thinking. Now, design thinking is not only applicable for user interface-based approach, but you could use it for an IoT-based projects as well. So that is how, that was the first thing which we did eventually. So with this, what use cases did we target? The customer said, I really don't want big data centers in my premises. I want to make more like a software as a service approach. So that is where we did a pricing based on per petrol station. So we said, okay, per petrol station per month, this is what the cost is going to be. We're going to provide an end-to-end managed service, which includes data collection, transformation, data science, and visualization. Okay. The second thing was we would be able to detect potential irregularity in operations. So again, using a lot of IoT data. And what we did was as and when the data was generated at the petrol stations, we were able to stream this live to the AWS cloud. Okay, and I would say here we are not making use of AWS Greengrass on the edge devices. It was our own edge framework which we make use of. Okay, and once that data is on the cloud, on the AWS cloud, we were able to do this all kind of analysis, all kind of machine learning approach. Okay, and that is where, since this is a time-based analysis, so we deployed a lot of algorithms which were based on time analysis. And because when the stock moves from morning to evening, or as in when the customer comes onto the fuel stations to fuel the car, there's a certain pattern. Okay, and that is where we use a lot of time-based algorithms, and this really helped us to determine any non-conformities or any anomalies. Okay, then as I said, what we also did is we kind of analyze the data in terms of when there's a weekend, when there's a festival, for instance, or when there's a public event. We did a lot of analysis in terms of their previous data, and we kind of identified how the stock is moving, what is the inventory positions, and eventually, based on that data, we were able to kind of detect any potential issues, and we were able to raise alarms to the dealers or the vendors who are managing the petrol station. Okay. Last not the least, I would say the customer said that they would like this to be an open data-based approach where when it comes to data ingestion, they can ingest data coming from MQTT, RabbitMQ, Kafka. So eventually, this was one of the constraints which the IT department of the customer had put in the request, saying that the whatever system we built, this is something which you have to support. Okay. So I would say, having said that, we design thinking, we identified which use cases, we based a sprint-based approach and stuff like that. But then any big data project, we also had a lot of challenges, I would say. Data quality. So one of the biggest issue in any IoT project is the data quality. So basically it is junk in, junk out. So what we identified was there was a lot of dirty data, which was in fact affecting the insights. Now, why this data is generated dirty, when I say, or why there's an anomaly or the quality issues, because sometimes if the sensors goes bad, or in case if there is any surge in the power, for instance, there is a big spike generated, and this spike basically creates an alarm, for instance. So we had to do this lot of this dirty data inside data quality, and that is where I could correlate with what Kaushik said with Glue, the new release which AWS is planning to build, or they're going to make it available, and that is something which we plan to make use of, because eventually it really helps in solving a lot of this data quality issues. Second, the problem of any big data, we had a huge volume, which was 5,000 plus retail outlets, and trust me, it was 20 to 30 GB of data per day, which we were streaming. Okay, and then yeah, we had to scale on the cloud. In terms of variety, we had data coming from different sensors, and then customers said, okay, you have data coming from my CRM, from my loyalty management system, so you have to consider all that, taking into consideration. Most important was velocity. Now, as in when any transaction which was happening at the petrol station, we needed to kind of do a real-time streaming to the cloud. Okay, and since a fraud case, we needed a very near real-time kind of an approach in terms of when it comes to fraud identification and details like in any fraud happens, so we are able to kind of diagnose it and kind of pinpoint it. Okay. Now, in addition, we had that this data should reside within the region; it cannot go outside a certain country. Another issue was we had a huge data to import into AWS because the customer is not on AWS. They are running their own data center. So eventually we had to kind of do this huge data import. Data latency, unavailability, because see, these petrol stations are rated at remote location. Not necessarily we would have GPRS, 3G or VPN or VSAT kind of a connection. Sometimes there is no data available. So that means we at certain period of time there's no data available, or when the connection comes, we have a huge amount of data coming and hitting our server. Okay, so that is something which we have to do. And as I said, fraud detection, multiple data sources. So eventually, these are the challenges which we encountered when we kind of moved from design thinking to actually doing a solution. So a couple of principles which we made use of when it comes to handling those challenges. So cloud first strategy. Now, I've been very honest with you here. We kind of evaluated both Microsoft and AWS at the beginning, and that is where we did a lot of pros and cons and stuff like that, and that is where we decided to make use of AWS. Second one was, as I said, we wanted more of kind of least operations or operation excellence. So that is where Lambda architecture, serverless based architecture was our prime focus from the day one. Third thing which we kept in mind was now if any user interface which we have to deploy, because this user interface is supposed to be used by all the petrol station providers and all by the departments within the customers, and that is where we wanted something which is not and at the same time, as I said, there were multiple data sources. So eventually we wanted to get the data from different data sources, and that is where we didn't go with the REST-based approach. We use a GraphQL-based approach, and trust me, it really works great, because in one query, you get the data from different data sources and boom, directly on the user interface. So with that, we were able to kind of provide a real-time dashboard to the customer, and it was in seconds the data was getting shown on the dashboard, okay? Purpose-built data service. So that's where we implemented a data lake approach, and for this data lake, we had different kind of data services, which I'll be talking about in the next slide. Then we moved, as I said, we moved from a rule-based approach to a machine learning-based approach, and so that is where we use a lot of machine learning algorithms for doing classification, for doing regression, for doing customer analytics. Okay, and last not the least, we use a lot of edge intelligence as well. So in fact, couple of algorithms which we developed on the cloud, customer said, okay, this really looks great, let's move this to edge device itself, so that the rules or the actions are taken on the retail station itself, rather than coming to the central station and then someone from the central station calling the vendors to fix it. So the most important thing for us was getting the data lake correct, and that is where we use S3 and Athena-based approach. Okay, and we use the purpose-built data services. So, for example, DynamoDB. So all the IoT data was streamed directly into DynamoDB, and then we use DynamoDB streams to identify anomalies. So we had written a lot of rules there, and then these streams were running a couple of rules and eventually taking that data onto the visualization component. Then what we used, sorry for data warehousing, that's a mistake. So we use Redshift for data warehouse. So eventually using Redshift, we were able to do a petabyte kind of scaling, and we were able to take this data from the Redshift, and we are able to ingest into, for instance, in this case, we use ClickSense for the visualization component of it. Of course, not the AWS QuickSight, because AWS QuickSight was not available in our region. So that is where we went with ClickSense. We use AWS RDS for Postgres. So all the master data in terms of vendors, in terms of geography, GPS location, stuff like that. And that's where we made use of AWS RDS. Now, machine learning algorithms, it was a mix. A couple of things we use SageMaker, but for a couple we kind of use the Python programs. Being open source, it had a lot of algorithms, for example, time series analysis. So for example, we use a lot of frameworks from Facebook when it comes to time series analysis, and this algorithms were running on EC2 clusters. Okay, and then we use ELK for log analytics. So eventually what we also did was we were getting a lot of stream data from social media. So in case if there was any negative sentiment and things like that, so this was coming as a plain text for us, and that is where we made use of ELK. And then last not the least was the GraphDB. Now the GraphDB we use for customer sales analytics, because eventually it could be a family who would be owning a car, going on different places, and having with this GraphDB, it was very easy because we were able to setting up all the connections, stuff like that. So I would say it's not one size fit all kind of stuff, where we said, okay, we use only one kind of a data component and we are able to do everything. That's not possible. So this we really learned in a hard way, because we said, okay, we will probably use one or two, but not all. But eventually over a period of journey, we thought that or with our POCs, with our kind of releases, this is what we finally achieved using this data lake components. So eventually, what we use from AWS, as I said, AWS IoT Core. So all the data which was coming from sensors was ingested using AWS IoT Core. Okay, and we had this not the AWS Lambda. We use the Lambda architecture when it comes to big data. So we had this hot data, warm data, cold data. Now, for kind of dividing this into hot, warm, and cold, we had used Kinesis. So now AWS Kinesis, we are able to kind of, so the endpoint was Redshift, for instance, or could be S3 file. So any data as per the compliance had to be stored in an S3 file format. Okay, so that is where Kinesis really helped, because we were able to kind of, the endpoints, we were able to have multiple rather than we doing it ourselves. Okay, so that was, Kinesis really worked really great. Lambda for running all our rules. Okay, S3 RDS, which I talked about, Redshift, very important, because we were able to do a lot of database persistence and everything using the 20 GB of data which was ingested. AppSync, as I said, customer wanted near real-time feedback, and ClickSense was not able to do it because it has a minimum 1 minute refresh interval. App QuickSight was not able to do it. Tableau, for instance, was not able to do it, and that is where we use AppSync, because it was pretty fast. Okay, now, so in terms of how we did was using this architecture, which I'll show in details in next slide. Eventually, what was happening is we were doing this lot of this data preparation in terms of running these algorithms using data science, and then any fraud which detected. So in case if, for instance, one of the fraud which could happen is, as I said, 10 customer comes and they ask for 10 liters, but they get 9 liters. So eventually there was a variation between the tank stock and the dispenser sale, so, and that is where we were able to correlate this and able to identify probably there is a fraud happening at it. Okay, and that is where what we did was any of those frauds which were happening, we were doing a sampling analysis by sending a people on the field, and they were able to say that yes, it's a fraud. There is a probably tampering done in the dispenser, or there is a problem in the leak in the tank itself. So that is how we kind of did a man in a loop, and not penalizing all the vendors because, or the dealers, because we identified a fraud, for instance. It could be probably a reason for that, and that is what really it helped. Okay, so in terms of architecture, of course, there are a lot of components, but from this slide perspective, I wanted to make it very simple. So eventually at the petrol stations, we had this edge devices, and now this edge devices was not using AWS Greengrass. It uses our own container framework, something similar like what AWS Greengrass 2.0 does at this moment of time. It was sending this data into the AWS IoT core, and then we had Lambda functions written which would create alerts. Now in this Lambda function, we were calling a couple of machine learning algorithms, so trained algorithms, and then some of this information was persisted into DynamoDB, and then in case a fraud was identified, we made use of AWS SNS for sending short messages, services, SMS, and stuff like that. Okay, and then in the middle, you would see all the AWS Lambda and Redshift, and that is where, as I said, we use a lot of Redshift-based functionality here for persisting all this data, and then all the rules, everything, the logic was written in Lambda, and eventually this information on the Redshift was then consumed by ClickSense. So ClickSense used the ODBC provider of Redshift and was able to pull in this data and do all this kind of slice and dicing. And most is this cold data, which is on the top, where all this information was stored in S3, and then using the Amazon EMR, that is where we run this lot of this machine learning algorithms, and using AWS Athena, which was again getting data from S3 from different databases, able to visualize it on ClickSense. So this is how we kind of visualize the vision which the customer has. So I would also like to share in terms of, I just have another 2 minutes. I think what works, what doesn't. So AWS hyperscaling really works great. Serverless, flawless, I would say. We were able to run so many of Lambda functions. We were able to run a lot of AppSync components. It works really great. AWS Glue. So as I said, the biggest challenge which we had was the customer already had a huge data of its own because they had run this IoT for a while, and we tried to use AWS Glue, but eventually what we observed was after 5 GB of data, there were a lot of failures, the Spark. So basically AWS Glue is based on Spark. A lot of Spark jobs failed, so that is where we decided to stop using AWS Glue. Okay, Redshift, again, as the data increased, what we found was there were a lot of issues in performance, and that is where we had to provide specialized DBA to look at the query performance and things like that. Now, the good part is today, what I saw in the reInvent is the Redshift would come with a machine learning based DBA operation. So eventually, they would be querying or they would be optimizing the query at the runtime, which really helps in such operations. Okay. The fourth thing which we had a challenge in terms of commercial value is, we were using AWS IoT, DynamoDB, DynamoDB streams and stuff like that. Now, for a small scale, when you look at the bill, it doesn't look quite large. But when we scaled it for 5,000 petrol stations, every petrol station having every minute petrol fueling, and that is where we found that eventually as the number of hits increases on the IoT and DynamoDB, probably when it comes to commercial, it's not a viable in case if you have not considered that. Okay, so it could be very expensive. So that is where when it comes to DynamoDB streams and stuff like that, we really want to see how fast we want to do this refresh. Okay, if possible, try to delay it. Otherwise, technically it works great, but when it comes to commercial, probably it's not a viable option. Last not the least, with serverless, this Lambda stuff, that is where we had a lot of these developers putting a lot of println statements, a lot of statements probably which is not optimized, and then eventually what we found was when this code used to run, it used to take a lot of CPU cycles. And for instance, Kaushik talked about millisecond-based billing approach. And what we found was if the code is not efficient, probably when you look at your bill, probably it doesn't sound so great. So eventually, we had to really educate a lot of our developers when it comes to coding Lambda functions, or when it comes to allocating memory to a Lambda function. So that's where we had to do a lot of third-party tools which we use to see how much does a Lambda function takes to execute. Now I see that that's out-of-box functionality provided by AWS itself. So these are something which was learned in a little hard way, but eventually we were able to make it. Okay. So these are some of these dashboards which we generated. So this is based on GraphQL. This is not based on ClickView. So eventually it tells you how many petrols, number of arrows, what kind of, so based on the kind of petrol or the liters of petrol which was consumed, we were able to identify whether it's a two-wheeler, it's a four-wheeler, it's a truck or stuff like that. Okay, and this dashboard was displayed on a big TV at the customer location, and he had a real-time view of what's happening at the overall country level, at the state level, at the petrol station level. So this is one. Then second is a couple of visualized components which we used. So for example, able to generate alarms in terms of what are the alarms, what are the sales, for instance, which is generated. And for the dealer, most important is how much is his nozzle use, how much is the order, because he really wants the ideal time to be as less as possible, because he wants his petrol station usage to be on high side, right? So this is what I thought I'll just put it across in terms of my experience in doing such a large scale IoT and analytics implementation. So now going forward, what we plan to do is we will continue using Redshift, and that is where we want to use a lot of features which is announced today from AWS. So that's where we would like to see how we can optimize our queries and really helps our developer and DBAs, for instance. Then the second one was from the AIoT perspective. In the reInvent, they talked about this field IoT component. So we plan to use it in terms of in case if you want to do a firmware upgrade on this edge devices. So something like this, which we plan to do. AWS Greengrass, they have decided to go open source. So we plan to see how we want to kind of enhance with Greengrass 2. And then all these petrol stations, they already have a lot of cameras. And now with this COVID stuff, there is a lot of compliance which the government has put in place. So eventually we wanted to use a lot of this video and image analytics running on the edge device itself. So these are something which we would be doing in coming months and taking this journey to a next level. That's all for today. And yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Really enjoyed it. Actually, we have 2 questions on the chat. Do you want me to read it or you will read it?
I'll just read it. Do you fully use AWS IoT device or you have to use taken support from IoT vendors? So no, we didn't use the AWS IoT devices fully. So as I said, the edge devices, we had, it was based on x86 architecture, and we had deployed our own container-based approach. So this edge devices, of course, we couldn't run Kubernetes because it runs on x86 64-bit, and this edge devices were 32-bit. So that is where we use a lot of the Unix container-based approach to run the services. And we just use a ruled part of AWS IoT. Okay, firmware upgrade was also not part of it. We did it ourselves. Okay. Then how much data from each petrol was generated on daily basis? As I said, 20 to 30 GB of data per petrol station we were ingesting. We are ingesting at this moment of time. So huge petrol, huge data. Of course, with COVID, we saw this going down. But eventually, I believe next year, probably this will raise it further because the vision of the customer is that they want to really replicate this, not for only for petrol station, but when it comes to gas distribution and things like that, they want to do something similar, or for their refineries, they want to do, because now it's proven that it works. The data scale is not a problem. It scales perfectly fine.
Awesome. Actually, I have a question. Like when I hope actually this answer your question, Ampani. I'm sorry, your name is quite hard to read. Hopefully, say it right. My question is, like, if the IoT device goes offline, right, or there's no really internet connection, how do you guys handle this?
So on the edge device, we persist the data of 7 days. Okay.
Okay.
And what it has a retrial loop. Okay. And as in when the data comes, whenever the connectivity comes, then we stream that data.
Awesome.
Okay, so,
awesome.
So that is the biggest challenge we had, because eventually what we used to have is sometimes we had no data, but sometimes we just had huge data coming onto our IoT terminals or on the Kafka streaming server. So
correct.
I mean, we had to handle all that kind of scenarios. Yeah.
Right. And for the sensor, right, like how do you detect the health of it? Is it like you build a solution to monitor it if something goes wrong with the sensor itself?
Yeah. So for instance, what we do is now out of box, it's a rule-based approach. So as simple as, for example, this dispenser. Now, if this dispenser is not working due to some problem, okay. So what we do is we know that in the last 15 days, this dispenser was doing some sale. Okay, so in a day, probably it was dispensing fuel for, say, 50 cars. Okay, now if I don't receive any data from the dispenser, but from other dispensers we are receiving this data, so we know that probably there's some problem with the dispenser. Okay, so that is how we identify. That's number one. Number two is we kind of do these dispensers also have small embedded devices. Okay, and this embedded devices sends the health packet, whether they are up or down. Okay, and then we used to analyze this health packet, which really helped us to identify what is working, what is not working. Okay, so that was second. And then third one, what we did is we kind of mix physics with data science. So we got some people who really understand the physics of this dispensers, the mechanical movements and stuff like that. And then using some kind of data science, we were able to kind of predict whether this device is up or down or need a maintenance. Yeah.
Nice. That's so interesting. Actually, there's a third question as well on the chat, asking how much time was taken to install end devices on each petrol pump.
So at each petrol station, it takes 4 to 8 weeks. Okay, now why 4 to 8 weeks? Because see, whenever we go to petrol station, we don't see wires around, right? So we had to involve a lot of contractors. So these contractors used to come, they used to lay the cables and stuff like that. Okay, and that is where you have to coordinate with the petrol station vendor or the dealer and things like that. So though the task is for 2 to 3 days, because we install the sensors in the tank, dispensers, but eventually when it comes to an end-to-end stuff, it takes 4 to 6 weeks eventually. Yeah.
Awesome. Any question, guys? You can just unmute yourself and ask directly if you guys have any questions. Okay, I have actually one last question regarding Lambda, right? Because I saw you guys like using Lambda a lot, right? And you mentioned that you had problem with CPU usage sometimes because of a bad design or implementation of Lambdas. But did you face any problems with concurrent execution with Lambdas, as they have 1,000? Because I see a lot of projects now hitting this limit quite fast, especially if it's open to the public, right? So did you face any problem similar to this?
No, we didn't. We didn't face this problem. The problem which we faced was, as I said, bad design. And see, these developers or the system DBA, I can imagine the situation. They want to play safe. So they used to over provision.
Right. Correct. And I really actually enjoy how you show us what's really worked and what's not, because I love this when people share what's failed actually and how you guys handle that things. So in this case, we can take care in the future. We have similar things.
In this case also, as I said, IoT and DynamoDB. I mean, if you look at well-referenced architecture, you look at the blueprints, really it works great, no doubt about it. See, but eventually, when it comes to commercial, you also look at the commercial value as well, right? Now, though we were able to stream this data real time, seconds, the director of this company was he said he has never seen something like this, where the petrol is getting fueled and the stocks getting updated in real time. Okay, so he was pretty very happy or very excited about it. But at the same time, when we had a look at our billing console, I mean, we said, wow, it's not commercially viable.
He was sad again.
So our CFO was really mad on us, saying that, okay, you have really excited the customer to a great extent. He's very happy the way what you have done. But at the same time, for us, it's non-viable. So at some point of time, we moved from IoT to Kafka, and we use a lot of. So we set up our own Kafka cluster on EC2 instance, and we decided to use Kafka for doing all this kind of stuff when it comes to streaming and things like that, and we kind of use IoT for different use cases. Again, so it's a mix of IoT and Kafka. And trust me, when I saw the presentation today from the reInvent, I saw that now IoT would by default support Kafka when it comes to streaming. So I mean, it's good to see that the problems which you face during implementation, now probably AWS is coming up with certain solutions. And when I was seeing this presentation today, I said, wow, this is the feedback which we gave to AWS. Probably they have used some of those to really implement it in their new product sets. Yeah. So,
right. So you felt like your voice got heard, man.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So
Awesome.
that's right. And that is where now, as we speak, we are trying to put this on the AWS marketplace as well. I mean, we initiated this process, and you would see sometime soon this on the marketplace.
Awesome, great stuff. Actually, we have one last question from Jackson. He's asking, since you are using a lot of serverless, any issues when there's a peak, downtime when you scale up or down?
So when it comes to Lambda, no, it doesn't. It's not an issue. But when it comes to an endpoint, probably that is where if your endpoint. So for instance, in a couple of cases, we were ingesting the data into Redshift. And as I said, as the data grew on the Redshift, we had a query problems as well. So eventually, when it comes to insertion into the Redshift, that is where you might see issue. So basically, the point which I'm making is your one endpoint. So north side you have serverless, but on the south end you have a non-serverless technology or a technology which probably can get into latency. You would see that even Lambda getting impacted with that.
Awesome. So thank you so much. Really enjoy. Any last question? Kaushik, Salam, do you want all good? Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, and hopefully we will get you again in our user group meetups to share like some of the cool stuff happening. And I hope you will stay in the networking session. I have some questions to ask as well relating to your team and the company as well.
Yeah, sure. More than happy. Pleasure. As I said, it's a pleasure for me to be part of this group. Thank you.
Awesome. Kaushik, you were saying something?
I think just again thanking Purshottam. It was we've been speaking for about a month, and for him to give us time. So thank you, Purshottam. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Let me just then quickly share my screen, and you guys can see, right? Oops. Okay, so guys, before we end up this meetup, we will really appreciate if you can just scan this QR code and just fill your feedback and what you think we can improve or what do you like. So feel free to scan this QR code, and I will share it later on the Facebook group. So please help us improve this community, as it's our community for everyone. And now the exciting news that I want to share with you guys, that we are trying something new, working with AWS. We call it AWS Community Workshop, and we started by next year, maybe next month or the second month. And what is this community workshop? Basically, this community program will help you like a hands-on workshop related to AWS services, and we will start with beginners workshop to intermediate workshop, and we can as well include like advanced workshop. So what I would from you guys to go to this link, I will share it now on the chat, and to fill up this form. So basically this form just asks you, when are you free, what time, and what would you like to hear in this workshop. So please, like, let me just share it now, right now.
Share the link on chat.
Thanks, Kaushik. So please, like, help us so we can, because we are thinking actually to have every month a meetup, one meetup and one workshop, so we can get our hands a bit dirty with all these AWS services. And we will bring someone to run this workshop, even from the community, from us, or from AWS. And we will start with first one with Donnie. He's from AWS. But first, please don't forget to fill up the form, and I will share it on our Facebook group as well. The last thing, if you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, we want to grow this channel because we are recording this live, and you can watch it later on YouTube. So please subscribe on YouTube. Our main channel for the meetups, usually on meetup.com and Facebook. And lately, Kaushik created a LinkedIn group where you can join us if you don't have a Facebook or you don't use it. That's it. I want to thank Kaushik and Salam for helping the community with all this live streaming and improving the community. So Salam, I think you don't see him here. I'm not sure if he's still here, but he's the one who handled the streaming for us, and he's working from behind the scene. So thanks, Kaushik, thanks, Salam, and of course the AWS user group team. And now we will stop the live session, and we can jump on the networking session, so we can talk about anything and ask any questions. So thank you, guys. And I think Yeah, I think now we are offline. Let me just stop sharing my screen. Wow, that was a good one, guys. Thanks for this. Also, guys, if you can share your screen if you want.
Still live.